Doy Gorton is a photojournalist with a distinguished career spanning decades. He has served as chief photographer for the Philadelphia Inquirer, a managing editor at the Cincinnati Enquirer, and was a staff photographer for the New York Times. Gorton covered the White House during the Carter and Reagan administrations. He's worked on Hollywood films like Glory and A River Runs Through It. Currently, he's focused on capturing the social landscape of the Southern American states. His new book is White South, 1969-1970. And today, on the Crit House, Doy Gorton talks about his myFIVE images from Walker Evans, Robert Frank, August Sander, Dorothea Lange, and Russell Lee.
Well, we have today somebody who I'm really honored to have on the program, Doy D. Gorton. Doy D. So I'm gonna call you D just because you told me that's your friends call you D. Is it okay with you? All right.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the Crit House.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here.
You came highly recommended by Fred Conrad and Tina Loit from the New York Times about the work that you're doing and the new book you have coming out. So you come highly recommended from people that I am very impressed with.
They're good people. I saw them a couple of years ago. It's been a while. We're all sort of separate, but I worked with Fred at the New York Times and Tina as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've had quite the background. Starting off with, you were a photographer with SNCC back early in the 60s, and then you were with the Cincinnati Enquirer, or is the Philadelphia Inquirer? So the Cincinnati and Philadelphia, right?
Well, yeah, I was a chief photographer at the Philadelphia Inquirer. And then I was a photographer with the New York Times and the White House photographer for the Times. And then later on, I became a managing editor at the Cincinnati Enquirer.
Got it.
I was there and joined an agency in Los Angeles called Onyx that photographed movies and celebrities and all the kinds of things that I didn't really want to do, but I sure made good money at it. So that's sort of the whole turn of things over a period of 30 some odd years. But before that, I was in the civil rights movement, and that's the genesis of kind of where I came from. If you'd like, I can talk about that if you think it's worthwhile.
Well, tell us who you are as a photographer. I mean, start with your genesis. Start where you started out. Yeah.
Well, I think the thing that interested me in photography was looking at the world and trying to make sense out of it. I'd grown up in the Mississippi Delta at a time when the place was nothing more than or less than pure white supremacy. I objected to that. I was part of the crew the boys that would escort the debutantes. I joined the Kappa Alpha Order, which was founded by Robert E. Lee when I was at Ole Miss. And I just came to the point where I could not put up with the society anymore. I'd gone through the riots when the school was integrated. These are things that most of your viewers probably won't remember because it's been so long ago. But that was formative for me. It was sort of the kernel in the beginning of the civil rights era. And I wound up joining SNCC, which is a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Inside of there was a person in New York, Marty Forsher, who had a remarkable repair shop, probably the best in New York City. And I think that Marty was a Holocaust survivor. I'm not sure. But he would take photographs. Did all the repairs for the great photographers, Avedon and then the Life magazine.
Camera repair.
Yes, did the camera.
Right.
He would make new cameras. He was an incredible guy. But he would take their old cameras and send them south to us in the civil rights movement because he wanted to help, both usually to photograph police brutality, he said, but mainly to make sure that we had pictures of the ongoing efforts. I've got one of those cameras. It was a 1947 Rolleiflex F35 Xenar, and that's what I had. And I remember walking around for 4 days before I took the first shot. I was so scared of it. But I became part of SNCC Photo and was part of all those things, whether it's a bridge across in Selma, whether it was a march on Washington. I was involved in all those kinds of things. And then I also started something called, there was a group called Students for a Democratic Society, joined them. And then I started SDS Photo. The point I was engaged in was the great movement of the 1960s. You'd call it the movement for peace and freedom. You could call it for civil rights or whatever, but I was part of that. And my photography was grounded in that, which invariably meant a sort of approach towards documentary, making delineations between who is what, that is to say typology. So I'll explain that in a minute. You had a sort of a lens that you were looking through there that was intellectual lens, not just visual or aesthetic, and that the photographs needed to make some kind of impact. They needed to tell a story, to create a narrative of some kind in order to be able to advance the kinds of issues that we were dealing with. I was part of that. That's what I did. And I still am. You know?
Yeah. Well, and so it feels like, I know we're going to jump from SNCC in the early 60s to where we are now, but it feels like what you're working on now with your book is linked in some way.
It is. It is.
So talk about your book.
I'll talk about it briefly. I hope this doesn't bore people. I think it's fascinating, but
I do too. Keep going.
I can't be dependent upon anybody else besides myself. What happened was that SNCC decided around 1966 or 67 or something that the whites in the movement inside of SNCC were doing things that blacks could do instead. That there was a distinction in efforts, and that the best thing to do was allow the black students, there were a lot of them, to organize the communities. But we should go back to our community and deal with it and look at it in terms of things like racism or whatever, or explaining the way the world worked. So that was my big idea. And so I got a book contract to go south and to photograph the white South in a manner like Walker Evans and James Agee's Now Let Us Praise Famous Men, which is a famous book that happened in the 30s and 40s. So I got a contract. I went down there with Jeff Sharrow, who ran Rap magazine in New York, and he had been vice president of SDS. And I photographed it for about a year. The editor that gave me the book contract died. The book was never published. And I carried those photographs with me everywhere I went, from here to there to yonder. I kept them here. About 3 years ago, the New York Times got wind of them. I was talking to a friend, Fred Conrad, and sure enough, they showed up there as a big layout in the New York Times. And from there, it moved towards publication. A lot of people wanted to see them. They've been published now all over the damn place. And the book itself is now coming out this year. It's called Doy Gorton's White South. It's being published by Fall Line Press. And it got 125 photographs, but what's unique about it is that we're trying to make sense out of photography as evidence now. Excuse me, cut this out if you don't like it. But we've got essays in there that look at the photographs and try to understand what's happening inside of these things. And the concept is that patterns persist. So that I've got photographs of white people here doing whatever they do. And in the background are black people, all with their arms across their hands in their pockets, always. That's true throughout my book. In other words, they're presenting in a way that I'm not dangerous. I don't mean to bother you. It's the whole impact. It's the impact of white supremacy upon relationships between people. And even when you take away legal white supremacy, when that's gone, that still persists. So our essays that are in the book, we have essays by a number of black academics, by my wife, who's an anthropologist, that take these photographs that are 60 years old. You can't alter them. They're not digital. This is the real thing. And it's a whole book full of them that tries to bring, you'd say that the past is a foreign land. I'm trying to be a messenger from that past, from a foreign land. So I'm going to present these photographs in the book in a way that people can make sense out of them. And you can see what I shot too, as we talk about that today, about the way what influenced me. But that's what the book is. It's a tremendous effort. And I'm real grateful to my publisher and everybody else for getting this far down the road.
Well, it sounds fantastic. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, yeah.
So you went through this challenging process that I asked you to do to choose 5 images that
Yeah,
have been
yeah, yeah, yeah.
influential to you. Yeah. So what was your thought process of coming up with those 5 images?
I I've tried to think about what it is that how I got to these photographers, and I think every one of them wasn't so much a discovery, so much it was a realization that I'd already thought about this. They were people that made sense to me. That it wasn't really quite same thing as a discovery. When I looked at Walker Evans in particular, I was in New Orleans and I was with Casey Hayden, who was my girlfriend at the time, and she handed me this book called The American Photography by Walker Evans. I literally started sweating. I mean, I shook. I had never seen anything like it before. And I never have been able to quite figure out what it was that profoundly influenced me. But I became a photographer within about 15 minutes. I mean, I hadn't been a photographer before, and that's
Wow.
when I got that camera and
Yeah.
all that kind of thing.
Huh.
But the stuff from Walker Evans just moved me. I mean, there was some sort of profound realization inside of that that I loved. And of course, today I can look at it and tell you, well, Walker Evans has an aesthetic and that he does his photography in a certain kind of a way. And he has enormous detail and using a large format camera and, all these things. But the result was I could look into that world and believe that I had some sort of access to it. I could bring it to me. It wasn't flattened out and two-dimensional. It was deeper than that.
Well, what a great transition to talk to your 5 images. So let's go take a look at Walker Evans and more.
Well, with this photograph, it's from Let Us Now Praise Famous Men when he and James Agee went south to photograph. He had already been part of the Farm Security Administration at that point and gone back. Did this for, I think, his Fortune magazine, which was never published, and so it came out as a book instead. But this goddamn composition, the openness, the directness of it, blew me away when I first saw this thing. People are hidden, and he found people that were hidden. He exposed them, but they also were part of it. In other words, it was a cooperative thing between the two of them, at least at the time of the photograph. But the composition, the lighting, I presume he used a strobe or flash in there because he used large format cameras. But I never have gotten over this photograph of the poor man, the little man. That by the way runs through the theme of all of my stuff is a concern for the little man, the person who's powerless or almost powerless, but who still confronts the world. That's a way in which I think about this photograph. Yeah, it moves me enormously because of the frankness and the feet. The mother, look to the left over there, the mother is with her feet crossed. These are people that I've heard politicians called I don't know, unworthy or deplorables or whatever they are, the forgotten man. But these people mean a great deal to me. And they do, because from those folks come our next generations. They're the hope for the future.
Yeah.
No matter what their position. And you've got to always be there to do something in some way if you can do it to be helpful.
Yeah.
But I think that Walker Evans was helpful simply by presenting them and allowing them to be themselves. You can see that the whole thing is set up. They're all sitting in chairs and they're all, he even has that kerchief around his neck there that somebody placed there. But it's extraordinary image. Yeah.
Robert Frank from The Americans with this iconic image for our second discussion piece.
The Robert Frank was the other one that I had sweat comes out when I saw his pictures. And Frank is the difference between what you'd call a thought and a conclusion. If you look at Walker Evans, there's a conclusion there. This is the way the world works. This is what things look like. And in it's his large format camera, an 8x10 with, I presume, a tripod on the floor. Robert Frank is looking around and it's a thought. It's just whatever happened, boom, and he shoots that with a little Leica. And it could not be further apart. Those are the two poles of that world of documentary photography, between someone like Walker Evans, which has this very studied kind of approach, and Robert Frank, who's a Swiss Jew. I think he had immigrated from America. He was Jewish. It was like he was an outsider on every level that you could imagine. Walker Evans, on the other hand, was an insider in every way you could possibly imagine, from a wealthy family. I think he was born in St. Louis, and always was part of the. Of course, he wound up in the Museum of Modern Art because his friends ran the place. You
Right.
know,
Right.
Robert Frank's stuff is, like I said, it's quick as a wink. It's an idea. It's not a conclusion. And when his work came out in the 1950s and 1960s, no one had seen stuff like this because everybody was following the narrative, whatever that was, about America. He came through and saw what everybody was seeing, and you recognized it the moment you saw it. So his work is just, it remains amazing. The other thing about these two guys, and these are my two guys really, they're both one-hit wonders. I mean, they each got a one book. That's it.
Right.
You may like, they go back, everybody goes back, and the academics go back. Oh, what about this? And this, wasn't in the book. Nothing touches those two books. No matter how many museum exhibits they have or whatever, this is it. These two guys, whatever they had, the best stuff came out during that period. Just it. That's it. That's all there was.
Well, if that is an accurate statement that they're a one-hit wonder, it's a big hit. It is a
The biggest hits you can imagine. Both of them changed photography, and particularly documentary photography.
and still influenced to this today. I mean, if like this program is any indication of the influence that images and photographers have had, both Evans and Frank are well represented on this program amongst the photographers who have influenced people into the generations that are now taking pictures to this day. And that includes, by the way, August Sander and some of the other photographers you're going to talk about as well. So, so here we have August Sander.
August, I presume August Sander is well known. He was a German photographer that worked in the first part of the 20th century. It turns out, by the way, that Walker Evans was deeply influenced by August Sander. Who knew? But there you are. I mean, that's what he said at one point. But Sander was part of. I would. It's hard to describe this exactly, but there was the German intellectual currents at the time were at the very forefront of so-called progressive thought in the West. And so whether it was anthropology or whether it was whatever role that you were in, they were on the very front end of it. And part of it was the ability to do what they call typologies, types of people. The anthropologists were measuring people's brains and head. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yes.
Determining whether they were good or bad based upon the cranium structure. That came out of Germany. And ultimately, eugenics did, which I'll mention. But typology, like a brick maker, looks like this. This is what he looks like. And he's a hod carrier, actually. But it's a typology. This is what they look like. And it's true, they did look like that. But the theory that they had, the typologists had, was that they will always look like this. They'll always have menial jobs because they live inside of a certain world. But August Sander was a progressive. Now here's the irony, is that his son was taken off to prison by the Nazis because he was a left winger and so forth. And Sander was also, many of his plates were destroyed by the Nazis during the 1940s. Typology, which was progressive, became a cudgel, became a weapon under the Nazis.
Yep.
As they looked for the perfect race.
Yep.
And so they took something that had been a theoretical idea, like with Sander, like who are these people, and turned it into something entirely where you had to be from the master race and everybody else was much lower than that. So it's a terrible irony about how these things move across political lines, and I'm aware of that. But I still am in total awe of August Sander's work, which was a large format camera of people outdoors for the most part. He was a studio photographer, but he worked outdoors. And he made these goddamn incredible pictures of people that you just feel like you see inside of their souls. You really do believe. That's what a hod carrier looks like. You know, if you go back to Germany, if you take a time capsule and were to do it, sure enough, that guy'd be there with that hat on and that jacket right there and those bricks over his shoulder.
Iconic image now, again from
Number one.
Dorothea Lange.
Number one in the world. Apparently, at one point, I'm not sure if it's still true, it was the most reproduced photograph in ever in the world. I'm sure
Oh.
that's part of the digital age. But you don't take it away from Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was as pure as a driven snow. She was a portraitist, as people probably know, in San Francisco, and photographed kind of people who were wealthy, people that had the money to do it. And then she turned her camera around and she photographed this picture, which was down the road a little bit. The first one was a white angel bread line, which you may have seen of the man turned around with a cup in his hand. She responded on a not an intellectual level, I don't think. I think eventually she did. It was visceral. It was a gut level, a spiritual level to the suffering that people were going through during the Depression era. One of the things you'll notice in a lot of these photographs, though, is that we're looking at an era in which white supremacy was also still very powerful. I mean, it really was. So you don't see many people of black photographs of black folks. It's the travails that happened with poor whites, which frankly were just as bad as blacks, but they didn't have to live under supremacy. They lived in a world in which maybe they could make their way out. At any rate, no one challenged that at the time. They really didn't. They photographed the people. That was the government, and that was a good government. It was Roosevelt. And these photographs happened under what they call the Farm Security Administration photographs. It was a group of people, which most folks know about, I guess. But the FSA is the most important, probably, group to me. I looked at their work forever and loved them. And two more of the people that we're going to discuss are FSA, or one
Yeah.
more, I guess. Russell Lee.
Let's talk. Russell Lee is not as well known to me as some of the other FSA photographers.
No. You know, I'm going to tell you two stories now. I'm going to tell you one about Russell Lee, and I'm going to tell you another one about Walker Evans, if you don't mind. Russell Lee was also out there. The FSA, what they did is they said, go photograph a small town or go photograph an FSA project where people are getting new tools and tractors and working. And that's their job. But what Russell Lee did, he did these remarkable things where he'd look in the corner, and this was in a Mexican-American home somewhere down in Texas, and their shrine was set up, and he'd shoot that. In addition to the other stuff, his eye was one that just loved to see things, and he was on some levels of what you would call a maximalist. I mean, that is a wall full of stuff, you know.
I've never heard that phrase, but I'm going to use it. That's good.
Yeah, it's a maximalist, but you know, I say it's a wall full of stuff, but it's also, if you're respectful, it's a sacred wall too.
Yeah.
It's got all these other dimensions to it, and it's terribly interesting. But his work, Russell Lee's work, is extraordinary. He was a very ordinary guy. He was from Texas, and he did all kinds of good folks working out in the fields and during the documentary. But I want to tell you a quick story. Do you mind if I tell you one?
Please do. I'm enthralled.
Russell Lee was at the University of Texas when Jeff and I went out to make these photographs for the White South. And we drove through Austin, Texas, on the way to Mississippi from LA, where we were going to go work. And Jeff was the guy who was do the book with me and all that. And so we're going. And I'd been in LA, and LA was, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I just come out of LA. It was crazy. I photographed the Sharon Tate murders.
Oh man.
2 weeks to 3 weeks before, in the way that we did things back in the day, right?
Yeah.
You know, I called up a guy at the airport. It's a story about Sharon Tate. I called the guy at the airport who was with Air America, which was the CIA.
Yeah.
He'd been in Vietnam. He was now at Santa Monica Airport. I said, I think they're on the lawn there, these bodies. Let's go over and take a look. No problem. He picks me up. Off we go. We're bringing the chopper down on top of where the bodies are all laid out, Sharon Tate and all of them. And they're screaming at us. The sheets came off the bodies.
Oh.
You know, 136 frames at 3 frames a second, and the plane flies off and we disappear over Sunset Boulevard. I go on down south to shoot my White South, and the pilot leaves for Seattle because the FAA's after him. If you don't believe that's the nature of the chaos, that's the chaos of the 60s. That's what it was like. So when I went down there, we drove through Austin, Texas, and we saw Russell Lee. And Russell Lee invited us into his backyard. He was teaching at the University of Texas, and Jeff knew him. I'd driven all night. He set me down at the table, and I think that we had a beer. I'm not sure. I think we had a beer, but I got so tired and so sleepy. And I'm thinking I'm in front of a guy that I worship this guy. I can't, okay. I think what I'll do is I'll close my left eye. I'll turn away from him like this a little, and I'll try to kind of, sleep on that side, while I'm kind of listening to him like this. And so that was my technique. And so we finally, at some point, everybody decided we're going to go, and we got up to leave. And Russell called Jeff aside. He said, "Look, Jeff, I like what you're doing. The Walker Evans, James H. It's a terrific idea. But I'd kind of worry a little bit about that photographer. He's got something terribly wrong with his eyes." Wonderful day. I tell you. But we went ahead and shot it. He did everything anyhow. He look up Russell Lee. You'll never find anyone just is more really honest and humble about the kind of way that he approached photography. There's not a bad bone in his body.
Well, I appreciate the introduction and more information about him. So Doy Gorton, wow, what a pleasure it is to have you on the program. Tell us again, when is your book scheduled to be published?
The book is supposed to be it's coming out, I think, probably this fall, but it's on what they call the spring list, because they have a fall list and a spring list in the book publishing business.
Yeah.
But we're going to get it out during this winter. There's going to be, I think, all kinds of things where people can buy it. It's a photography book, which means it's too expensive, and it means it's very difficult to support. And we've been working on this for 3 years, and not a single one of our estimates for the publishing of the book, the printing of it, are correct. Everything went wrong. So it's a little bit more than we expected.
Will there be shows that go along with it? Will you be things on the wall?
Well, so far, yeah. There's one that I'm going to in Mississippi at the you'll like this. It's at the Hot Tamale Festival in Greenville, Mississippi. I'm from Greenville. What's important about this is I'm going in there and I'm about to do a show called The White South. And these folks were not happy with me joining SNCC back in the 1960s. So I'm now going back for the first time in my life and to show my fellow people I grew up with, those of us who are still alive, this is what I meant. This is what I saw. I want to show you this, and we're going to discuss this. We're going to have a big show. It's an exhibit and a big discussion. After that, it's going to, I think, to the Museum of Modern Art, Mississippi Museum of Art, I think it is. And then there's another one, and then next year in Texas, it's going to be in the spring. But we're just getting started on this, and we hope that this will be something that will make a difference. Like I said, I'm trying to explain an era and trying to understand why it's now relevant. I mean, I don't know if I don't need to draw that out too much, but we're going through many of the same things today.
No, I think I think that's important to have that conversation, because I mean, I was just, as I was learning a little bit about you before we started recording this, I realized you joined SNCC in 1963. That's the year I was born. I mean, and you were talking about, like, this audience may not remember it. I mean, a lot of our audience skews a little bit older, but there's like my son who's 21, he's never heard of SNCC, but I mean, this is things that these are things that people need to know.
Well, I tell you, the other problem here too is that the history gets flattened and flattened and flattened and flattened until it's just like this. So all is March on Washington, and then there's a movie about the Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, and that's it. We're done. And somebody gets killed. This book, in the kind of way I'm doing it, brings nuance to it, because what you've got to know is that there were good people everywhere. White folks, and without white folks, the damn thing, people would have gotten murdered forever, but there were people who stopped that. So the civil rights movement and the power of it and the honor of it goes to everyone. It's not just one group of folks who did it. And that's in my book. That's all there. But I don't back off from talking about white supremacy either. But that's whatever, you know.
Well, Doy
Ameri-
Gorton,
It's the American experience, I
yeah.
guess.
Yes, it is. Sadly, but I appreciate you. I'm looking forward to seeing the book, and thank you for doing it. And thank you for joining us on the Crit House. It was really it was really an honor to talk to you. Thank you.
Let me ask you something. Where
Yes,
in the
sir.
world do guys like you come from who spend your time and do these wonderful things? You need to be really complimented for doing that. You make the difference. You are the difference.
I- You're the one who's doing the work. You're the one who's. I'm just giving you an opportunity to be able to talk about it and try to learn from you as a photographer. But I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's
Well,
it's kind of you to say. And thank you all for watching the Crit House.